Welcome. We are at 2018 CPAC.
For your first one, Anton.
My first one.
Congratulations.
Liz is exposing me to
He's going to be a conservative Republican by the end of this. Yes, Lord.
Pump your brakes. So, our guest right now is Rabbi Yaakov Menken. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah, glad to be here representing my new organization, Coalition for Jewish Values.
The Coalition for Jewish Values. Tell us something about that.
I'm the managing director of this new organization, which is actually a group of, we're Orthodox observant rabbis who believe in promoting true Jewish values out in public policy.
So are there ones that are not true Jewish? We're not Jewish. So, what are
the strange thing is that it's considered innovative to have a pro-Jewish values Jewish organization.
I don't get that. Why?
Yeah, but
I'm confused. I'm already confused. We
became the largest rabbinic public policy organization, not because we have hundreds of rabbis, which we do, but because we formed, because there was nobody else in this space at all.
Why? Because before you were kind of doing other things and supporting other organizations?
You have liberal rabbis from the Reform movement, for example, who are representing their personal liberal opinions as Judaism.
Okay, do you mind? So I grew up here, went to Sidwell, and we talked about this yesterday. I went to Columbia, so I have a lot of friends who were Jewish, but can you break it down for our audience? Like, there are 3 or 4
denominations. They look at 3 major denominations. And as far as the Torah observant community, they were labeled Orthodox by the Reformers. This goes back a century and a half.
Okay, thank you.
But it wasn't a name that we chose for, we're going to be Orthodox, but it kind of stuck.
So they were like traditional.
We're the ones who are maintaining the traditions of Judaism, at least as best as we can, from everything that we learned from our teachers who learned from theirs, going straight back.
Okay.
Whereas Reform intentionally said, we're going to dispose of that. We're going to look for, they actually said, we want to look for development in the Mosaic religion, like we're going to do better. Which means to say we can do more morality better than the Bible, which means that when new liberal ideas come along, they adopt them as Judaism. Because, hey, we're going to do Judaism better than our ancestors did.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's Reform and then there's
Now, here's a funny thing. Conservative Jews are liberals, which is really confusing until you know that in Europe, liberals are conservatives.
Okay.
What we call conservatives.
Okay, cool.
But, so conservative Judaism is really, they intended to, be something contrary to Reform. We're going to conserve the traditions. In reality, they kind of follow Reform's lead.
All right. Okay. So does the Coalition for Jewish Values support, is this any way associated with Zionism or Zionism, Zionism.
Not particularly Zionism like that political philosophy of Herzl, but the idea that Jews have a permanent attachment to Zion is based, right in our religion. It's something that we pray for every day. And so the idea that a Jew should be able to live anywhere in the Jewish homeland, sure, that's something we would support, because that's just a matter of fairness.
May I ask you a question? I know that...
Hold on. I don't want to segue from that.
Yeah.
And this is in response to how, in America, that especially in African American community, when we see what goes on in Israel with the Palestinians, is Zion where the Palestinians are now, because this is somewhat confusing, because there's really no map in the Bible that says that the place is being occupied right now is Israel or Zion, when in actuality there is Palestine mentioned as well as Israel within these So where are the borders and where is this place located?
Okay, there's not really a historical question, because for the most part, there are cities that keep carrying their ancestral names. For example, Jerusalem. We don't have a question where Jerusalem is. Hebron, the site of the cave of the patriarchs. That is not a question. We know and have known for all history where those places are. The truth of the matter is that the name Palestine has its origin in ethnic cleansing and barbarism. When the Romans were busy exiling the Jews from that land, the land was called Judea.
Right.
Yehuda.
Right.
And the problem is there's a close relationship between Yehuda, Judea, and Yehudim, Jews. So the Romans didn't like that. And so they assigned it a new name, Palestine, to disenfranchise the Jews. And if you actually look at what's going on today, the majority of Israel's Jewish population are refugees from ethnic cleansing across the Arab world. Every Arab state removed over 90% of their Jews in violent acts before and after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. And the refugees from that went to Israel. So really, if it was a tit-for-tat type of situation, the Jews would have expelled all the Arabs from Israel in retaliation for being expelled from all the Arab countries.
Who is that?
But indeed, that's not what happened at all. So when you see people accusing Israel of doing ethnic cleansing, they've got the entire picture turned upside down.
Can I ask you a question? When I was at school in college, it was during the second Intifada, so it was like 2001, 2002, and for me, I was just kind of like, we're in New York, like we're just learning about all these different things, and we had a sit-in, but it was an outdoors sit-in, whatever, and there was an opportunity for people to like open mic, speak your piece, and what you believe in this issue at the time. I have no idea what number Intifada we are in now, but I remember distinctly a very, again, I'm using the term, might not be the correct term, but a very a Hasidic maybe Jew.
Okay.
That stood up and said, Zion and Israel is supposed to be an aspiration. It's never supposed to have been a terrestrial concept because, in his belief, once you create the state of Israel as an actual entity, you will make Jews beholden to man and not God. Have you heard that before?
Yeah, but if you listen very carefully to what he's saying, and that is an opinion to a certain segment of the Hasidic community, and there's an even tinier segment called Neturei Karta, which is sadly just a little bit crazy about this and endanger everybody. But the real philosophy there is a religious objection to the idea of having created, not that it's unfair, not
Why
that in the
Jews
way of all the
crazy?
nations of the world, but
Why
that...
is that a crazy concept?
Well, no, that what I mean when I said the crazies of Neturei Karta is because they are actually sitting down with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of Iran and other groups that are espousing Israel's destruction, because they believe that right now, if Israel would give up and hand themselves over to the Arab world, everybody would sit down in peace. Sadly, that is crazy.
But before you get to that point, but is the concept? I was just asking about the concept.
Oh, absolutely,
the notion that
actually,
we're supposed to aspire for it.
Right. We go back. If you go back to the 1920s, there was a Rabbi Yosef Sonnenfeld, who was the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, and very opposed to the idea of creating a Jewish country there. He said, "We don't want this." But and then the mufti or one of the sheikhs of the Arab world came to visit him and said, "You know what? We ought to cooperate because we're against the Zionists and you're against the Zionists." He said, "You don't understand. We're against the Zionists because they're not Jewish enough. You're against the Zionists because they're too Jewish." In other words, today where we stand, that country's been created. That battle is long gone. The ideological battle of whether or not the Jews should have a country, even if we believe that was a bad idea, because it turned into a lightning rod for anti-Semitism around the world. And yet, the sad fact, that the reality in which we live is, but we do have that country. And it's not all sad, because obviously you have huge privileges to live there like never before.
What do you think about?
I can't agree that it's a huge privilege for those Palestinians that we end up seeing on the news or going to school with, who tell us about going through certain checkpoints and family members coming up missing and 9-year-old boys getting killed. I mean, somewhere within that narrative of what's being promoted, what you're telling me, and what they're telling us, there's some things that are conflicting with one another. An example, sir, when you said that the Jewish individuals who were expelled out of Muslim countries, in my world history class, basically they were saying that these were the Europeans that survived the Holocaust from Poland and Germany that was set up through Britain and America, who facilitated and created Israel for the Europeans to come back into Palestine. The European
Well,
Jews
it was European Jews who created the whole Zionist enterprise and created the country because it was the British mandate.
Yeah.
British mandatory Palestine was divided into... Jordan is actually the vast majority of British mandatory Palestine. So as far as, land rights, if we're going to divide them equally, blah, 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 the Arabs were already given 75% of that mandate. So there's no fairness issue on that. But what I was talking about is the majority of the people who actually live there. The idea was to create a country that would be a refuge for Jews to escape persecution elsewhere. And what happened was they were escaping. It's not the ones from the Europe who are the dominant subgroup in Israel.
Right.
What I'm saying is that the majority of them are actually forced out of Arab states. There's entire communities of Syrians, of Moroccans, of Algerians, of Yemenites, of Iraqis. Iraq and Syria are two places where they expelled all their Jews, and things have worked fabulously for them ever since.
Which leads me to a segue question about the in Ethiopia, the Beta Israel, the Falashas,
Yes.
who sought refuge in Israel, but now they're saying that they're having a hard time there because of their complexion. And something that I saw news on the other day in which they were saying, look, all you Africans, go to Sudan or go somewhere else. We don't want you here. So it's basically a refuge for Jewish people and not all people, because to me that becomes somewhat problematic, especially when Americans, African Americans, Italian Americans, and other Americans, some of our tax dollars go to maintain the stability of Israel, and our own communities, Chicago, Atlanta, and Baltimore, are not receiving these same funds, which are greatly needed.
Well, right now, what's going on, there's a couple of different issues that you covered there. As far as the Beta Israel community, the Falashas, look, there's racism in every country. You cannot find a country with greater racial diversity and less racism than Israel. You routinely find white, European-looking Jews marrying dark-skinned, Arab country Jews marrying Beta Israel Jews. In fact, Israel is the only country in the world that has imported at its own expense tens of thousands of black people to be free citizens. It's a sad commentary on the rest of the world. But the Beta Israel community in Ethiopia was experiencing persecution because of their Jewish practices.
Yes.
And so Israel organized an operation, two separate operations actually, to bring them in by plane in order to make them free citizens, not in order to enslave them or anything horrible or discriminate against them, the very opposite. And there are, in fact, I just a few weeks ago was privileged to meet a minister from the Likud party who is a member of that community. And, he was standing there next to an Arabic-looking woman, next to a European-looking man, actually American-looking man, Michael Oren, who were all government ministers from Israel, or members of the Knesset.
So are people being pushed out? I don't know.
So there's mentioned it, well, so I don't know. You know what's going on right here with the conflict over the wall. There's illegal immigration in every country, and a lot of black Africans learned, there's a grapevine, of course, on these things. And they learned that Israel's a great country to run to. But Israel, like every other country, does not want a whole lot of illegal immigration going on. And the borders were entirely too porous. So, Trump's talking about building a wall. There's already something of a barrier or whatever, but it's still, very, very porous to get over the border. And finally, they had as from what I understand, the offer on the table is you take a couple $1,000s cash with you for the privilege of going home, so that we don't have to expel you. So that's a very by comparison to most countries, including the United States, which even under Obama expelled hundreds of thousands or millions of illegal immigrants. what's going on in Israel, if you look beyond the news and try to get down to what's really happening,
Yes.
it's actually much more fair and much more humane than what's going on in most other countries when they say we're overrun by illegal immigrants and here's what we have to do.
The other question I wanted to ask you real quick, sorry.
Yes, here's the follow. My second question. My second question.
He's great.
I apologize.
I'll just wait.
My second question, being an individual who lives in Baltimore and a lot of American money is invested in maintaining the security of Israel. Now, you see the conditions of Baltimore.
Right.
They are horrible. There are terrible schools, lack of employment, criminal justice system. There's this gun task force. What is this scandal that's going on right now? How do we juxtapose, or how does an American feel comfortable with seeing the decay of American cities and values while at the same time sending aid to another country? How do we reconcile this?
We have a lot of, obviously Trump has been talking about foreign aid to a lot of countries right now, including countries that don't support and don't provide return on investment. The interesting thing is that Israel's not getting infrastructure funding from America.
Defense.
They're not getting funds for roads. They're not getting funds. What's going on with defense is that Israel is becoming the frontline outpost in the Middle East for America's defensive posture in favor of American values and supporting human rights and encouraging human rights in that section of the world, where in Syria, for example, that is a very tough and nasty battle. That Israel just got entangled in when the Iranians in Syria operated a drone that flew into Israeli airspace. And then when they shot it down, the Iranians fired a salvo of missiles, one of which hit an F-16. So the Israelis are really putting their lives on the line to provide that frontline defense and also providing a lot of return on investment. In fact, it was just today, it was revealed that Israel has a cybersecurity division, kind of like the cybersecurity folks at the NSA, who do cyber eavesdropping and cyber, counterintelligence. And they discovered a plot to blow up an Eritrean airliner on its way from, if I'm getting it right, Australia to it's either the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia. But this was Israel providing intelligence to the international community that saved a whole lot of innocent lives on a flight from Australia to one of the Arab states. And they're like, no, it doesn't matter. This is ISIS, and we're all fighting ISIS together. And so what these guys are doing on defense is actually really magnifying sadly, the Israelis are the first who get to test a lot of these, the data that the military powerhouses in America get back from Israeli field testing of their equipment is hugely beneficial and saves a lot of American lives. I mean, a lot of American soldiers get out there with stuff that's been battle tested that they never had to battle test themselves.
So we're about to run out of time. And
no problem.
I feel like we could do a whole other.
We could do about 20 sessions.
Yeah, it's great. There's a lot of information.
Our real goal here is Jewish values and which are American Judeo-Christian ethics in public policy.
I think honestly,
we got Israel's a great detour, but it's good.
I hope you appreciate that. Our perception and our perspective comes from our heritage and our life journey.
Oh, absolutely.
In our own, sort of nationalism as well.
Right.
We're Americans of African descent, and I'm also.
But a lot of us are exposed to a lot of misinformation.
It's a lot of misinformation. But at the end of the day, if we can't even trust our own media, how can we trust other people's media?
Exactly.
Everybody has their own sort of mission, if you will.
For example, I would invite you to fact check me on anything I said here. Look at the Jewish population of any Arab country in 1920 and 2020. Absolutely, I would like the audience to fact check relentlessly.
I would argue, and that's the reason why I have not been very proactive in this conversation, though I think Anton has a lot of things that has been atop of his mind, and he's been very energetic about them. I'm just going to say this right now. In my experience over the last, 20 years of my life, 22 years of my life, I feel as if This might be a very controversial statement.
Go for it.
Shoot from the hips.
There's no other community, culture, religion, region that affords the protection that Zionists and or Jewish people get compared to the rest of the world, because it's so controversial and there's so much deep-seated sort of history, pain, suffering, the Holocaust. You know, I would cringe if I met a Holocaust denier. Like, I don't even understand. It doesn't even fathom. I mean, and if anything, as Americans of African descent, I'm gonna admit it. Even if I'm a political person, it's very hard for me personally to fathom the fact that one's suffering is harder than someone else's suffering, or that it happened in the 20th century, so therefore it's worse than what happened in the 16th century or the 17th century or the 18th century. That someone is out there like upping one another about, oh, my people have suffered more than you, so therefore you should have more, compassion for me.
It's called the Olympics of oppression.
But you know,
I do feel that what you say.
No,
but that's not. I think you're misunderstanding something.
No, it's not about you specifically. I'm
No,
talking
I get
about
it.
in general.
Yeah, I know, I get it.
Conversation. Whenever
But
the conversation comes up, do you know what I'm saying?
Let me level with you on that.
Because one of the things I respect about Jewish people is they're going to make sure that the narrative is out there.
There's a lot more agreement.
We
understand.
Try. But there's a lot. Let me fill in a picture that you don't know about, which is, and by the way, there's only one Jewish majority country, Israel, and the reason why it existed is, Herzl's vision was, he had an idea that it would stop anti-Semitism, because what he saw throughout Europe, he grew up in Vienna, and Vienna, and that time Vienna and Austria were like vying for control of Austria and Hungary were vying for control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, wrote about it because he was a journalist and he was there. He said, whatever side you're on, the Jews are on the other side. Whoever you were in favor of, you were against the Jews. And that was throughout Austria-Hungary. And then he went to France and he saw the Dreyfus trial, where a Jew was accused of treason that was actually committed by an ethnic Frenchman.
Right.
And once again, they picked on the Jew.
All
and
these references have nothing to do with Americans of African descent.
No.
I'm just saying.
No. If we're talking about Israel, we got to be globalist about this.
But at the end of the day,
Israel was created. His vision was, if we create a refuge for Jews, anti-Semitism will go away. He was wrong. Clearly, he was wrong. But what you need to understand is, look at European history of the last millennium. Expulsions of Jews and ethnic cleansing of Jews was not a one-time thing. In the last 1,000 years, there have been over 100 different instances of times. England expelled all of their Jews in the 11th century. France expelled all their Jews at a certain point from certain regions. Spain, of course, was famously 1492, 1494.
Question, Rabbi.
Yeah. In other words, we needed a refuge.
I understand.
And that's what Herzl's vision was.
I appreciate that. First of all, not all Jews are going to be living in Israel, so it is.
Oh, right.
It won't grow large enough.
Honestly,
I don't know how many
I think
Jews
anybody who trusts Israel too much or trusts America too much is making a mistake.
Because sometimes that's how it.
Not
that's how it
trusting
feels.
America 100%.
But with that statement true, honestly, like that's how I feel. Like as a quasi-politician or politician, it's as if we can debate and fight tooth and nail about what the United States should do, ought to do, how we should lead, how we not should lead, should we be, interventionist or we should be isolationist. There's a myriad of ways that we can question what our own native country can and ought not do, but I would argue it's hard to question. We don't have that same ability of freedom around the question of anything that Israel does. That's how it.
The accountability.
It's just weird. I don't know how to wrap my head around that.
But that Israel is
meaning if something were to happen where, I don't know. Like for me, this is a weird statement, but I remember the report that there are these 1,000-year-old olive trees that were chopped down. and they were a source of economy and heritage for the community that was living over there, and they were just chopped to make apartments for resettlers, right, for the settlement. And I don't neighborhood or whatever.
We don't know the truth of that, of course.
But what I'm saying is, if you can say we don't know the truth, that means that we can't have any of this conversation. Do you understand? So what I'm saying is, is there a point in time where Israel can make a mistake?
Of course, they make mistakes all the time.
So how do you have that conversation without being called anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist?
Well, it's because
as a non-Jewish person, it's as if every single time we wonder, is that the right thing? Oh, you're anti-Semitic. Oh, you're anti-Zionist.
No. It's very easy for us to identify when it's anti-Semitism. And there's the thing about the 3 Ds: the demonization, the double standard, the delegitimization. That's not talking about Israel's policies. That's talking about, Israel, the Jews. And it's very old wolf under very new clothing. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it a lot of times before. The fundamental of anti-Semitism is that Jews are thieves. They're connivers. The stereotypes about black people. I'm telling you from Jewish sources.
Probably in Europe, but from my reference, Jews are smart. Jews are educated.
They support each other.
Tooth
and nail.
And they are to be respected because they're God's chosen people.
Very sadly, Jews do not support. Meaning, not all Jews support. I am amazed at the anti-Israel movement among Jews who don't. They're liberal Jews who just don't know anything about our heritage.
The other thing I know we have to wrap up because there are other people coming up, but. Wasn't there they always talk about how the party switched from Democrat to Republican. Yeah. I've heard from a lot of conservative Jews here at CPAC and other conservative organizations that they're so shocked where fellow Jews who are Democrats, who are, what is it, the BDS the movement? Tell me a little bit about that in a very short chunk, because I feel like that's a very
I'll give you a soundbite for BDS, which is great.
Yeah.
BDS is the belief that replicating a Nazi tactic is a good way to get Jews to compromise the security of their children.
I didn't even understand the whole sentence. Can you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
It's filled with a lot of context, but it's like, no, but it's absolutely
Nazi,
true.
So it's hard.
The very first thing the Nazis did was a boycott. Now,
a slippery slope thing.
But here's the thing. The Arab boycott of 1945, which has been going on ever since 1945, I mean, a Pakistani passport actually has stamped on it, not valid in Israel.
Okay.
And not valid for entry into Israel.
Okay.
This is a total pathology of, we're not going to recognize Israel, the Zionist entity.
So
we're not going to have anything to do with it. The delegitimization of the country. The whole point was economic warfare.
But Israel is such a strong country, though.
But BDS is just reinventing that economic warfare. It's not productive. It doesn't help the actual Palestinians on the West Bank. One of the victories of BDS was to get SodaStream, the company, to shut down their plant on the West Bank and move to a plant in southern Israel instead, which was a tragedy for Palestinians, Arabs. Because out there in the West Bank, they were getting paid like 5 times the standard wage. They were working side by side with Jewish Israelis. You got to go downstairs in the bottom level. The Yesha Council has a video showing a plant where you've got Arabs and Jews working side by side. I mean, look at Israel is a first world democracy with Arab citizens. Meaning that you've got members of Knesset who are Arabs and who are in fact anti-Israel on a lot of these things, who still have a voice. And there are 2 Arab justices on the Supreme Court. So if people have a complaint about olive trees, they have somewhere to go. It's not like what's going on in a lot of the Arab states, including, by the way, Sudan, where they're doing black slavery right now.
Sudan? You mean Libya?
I don't know about Libya. I can't tell you for sure. Libya. I can tell you Sudan's doing black slavery right now, and Israel's racial wrongs are like trivial by comparison.
Which Sudan? North Sudan or South Sudan?
I think it's in both. I honestly believe that's one thing, because there's a big war going on between the 2 sides, but still. And neither one is right on that that issue. And I think that's it's very easy to distinguish between criticism of Israel's government and its policies and a delegitimization of the whole country. Oh, we should give up and start over. Oh, the Jews don't deserve a country. And that root that Jews are thieves. I mean, look at Hebron as a good example. Settlers are coming into Hebron and taking it away from the Arabs, is what we hear. Well, there was continuous settlement in Hebron from the time of the destruction of the Second Temple for 1,000 years.
And wasn't it like everybody lived together in peace for a long
Then actually it was the European Crusaders who came through and slaughtered them all in the year 1000.
I think
so it's the European.
Yeah,
they got us all into this. Richard the Lionheart.
That's right.
Richard the Lionheart.
Absolutely.
We've come full circle.
Okay, let's finish. 100 years later, the Jews moved back in. And they were continuously in Hebron. Like during the Middle Ages, there were the 4 holy cities of Israel. And those 4 holy cities were Jerusalem and Tveria and Tzfas and Hebron.
Right.
So it was a Jewish settlement and a center of Jewish scholarship in the 15 and 1600s. Unquestioned. When did Jewish settlement come to an end in Hebron? In 1929, when the Arabs slaughtered them. The
So
Arabs, there was this, and here's where the misinformation hurts. Jews went to pray at the Western Wall. They had prayer services at the Western Wall. The Arabs claimed the Jews are trying to take over or some such. And they rioted in Hebron, which is a dozen miles away. In those days, it was a 3-day journey, and killed people out.
Right.
And the British said, we're not going to be able to protect the remnant. We're going to move you out. And in 1948, the Jordanians went further and moved the Jews, expelled all the Jews in East Jerusalem. The whole idea that East Jerusalem was supposed to be Arab. It only became Arab because they expelled all their Jews.
Wow.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
All right. Well, I thank you so much for your time. We've learned a lot, and I think this is why we have to have these conversations.
Exactly.
I think that's really helpful to give you, context that you may not hear in all these reports.
But I do hope that you understand our sort of my anxiety for even just saying anything and questioning.
No, it's you see,
it is something that I think all communities should be mindful of.
It's a very first world humanitarian. I mean, if you look at what goes on in Hadassah Hospital, for example, where you got Arab and Jewish doctors working side by side, it can be done, and it does happen. And actually, Israel's the one place where it's happening right now. We should be encouraging that kind of coexistence to grow.
Well,
and we'd like to thank you very much for joining us. One of my last things I want to talk about was the text, the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. But unfortunately, we'll have to
do another time. That'd be great. I would look forward to that.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, sir.
Thank you so much.